There are men who spend their entire lives preparing for a single moment they never asked for. And when that moment finally arrives, the world punishes them for being ready. A crowded restaurant, a woman choking, a room full of powerful people who did absolutely nothing. One man stood up, and everything that followed, the false charges, the corporate assassins, the billion-dollar war waged against a mechanic who just wanted to take his daughter to dinner, all of it began with that one decision to move when everyone else stayed frozen in their seats. If stories like this one speak to you, stories about ordinary people forced into extraordinary moments, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss what comes next. Drop a like on this video and tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now settle in, because this one is going to take you somewhere. The reservation had taken Logan Carter 11 weeks to get, not because he knew anyone at Callaway's, not because he had connections or a company card or a last name that opened doors. He'd gotten it the old-fashioned way. He'd called every Monday morning at exactly 8:01 a.m. when the reservations line opened, and on the 11th attempt, a tired hostess had finally told him they'd had a cancellation for a Thursday evening, party of 2, 7:30. He'd said yes before she finished the sentence. That was the kind of man Logan Carter was. Patient when he had to be, decisive when it counted. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 6:15 that evening, knotting his tie for the third time. The tie was navy blue, a little too wide by current standards, bought 3 years ago for a funeral and worn exactly once since. His dress shirt was white, freshly pressed, and his dark slacks had a crease in them he'd put there himself with a towel and an iron that leaked steam from the wrong side. He wasn't the kind of man who owned a suit jacket that fit anymore. His shoulders had gotten too wide somewhere along the way, and the one he had pulled out of the closet made him look like a linebacker stuffed into a professor's blazer, so he'd put it back. He looked at himself for a long moment. 37 years old. A jaw that needed shaving again by noon no matter how close he cut it in the morning. A scar running from the outer corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone. He told people it was from a car accident, which was easier than the truth. Hands that were permanently rough no matter how much he washed them, the skin around his knuckles perpetually cracked from brake fluid and cold garage air. He looked like what he was. A mechanic. That was fine. That was enough. He heard her before he saw her. Small feet padding down the hallway, the soft drag of dress shoes she wasn't used to wearing. Dad? 8-year-old Maisie appeared in the bathroom doorway in a white dress with yellow flowers on it, her dark hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails that Logan had done himself. She was studying his tie with the serious expression she used when she was trying to be polite about something she didn't like. That's the funeral tie. It's a navy tie. It's the same one you wore to Uncle Ray's funeral. Uncle Ray would have wanted me to get use out of it. Maisie considered this with genuine philosophical weight. She was 8, but she thought about things the way someone twice her age might. Slowly, from multiple angles, like she was checking the structural integrity of an idea before she trusted it. Logan didn't know where she'd gotten that from. Certainly not from him. He'd always been more of a react first, analyze later kind of person, which had served him well in some contexts and cost him dearly in others. It's still the funeral tie, she said finally. You look beautiful, he told her, and meant it completely. She looked at the floor when he said it, the way she always did when something actually landed. You look okay, she said. For someone in a funeral tie? He crouched down and straightened one of her pigtails. Happy birthday, Bug. I'm 8, she said. Not a bug. You'll be a bug until you're 40. She gave him the flat stare she'd inherited from no one he could identify. That's a long time to be a bug. It goes fast, he said, and stood up and checked his watch. A plain black-faced field watch, nothing fancy, and said, You ready? I've been ready for 20 minutes, she said, which was true. She'd been sitting on the couch in her dress since 6 o'clock, hands folded in her lap, watching him iron his shirt. They took the subway because parking in Midtown on a Thursday evening was an exercise in financial self-destruction, and Logan Carter had not spent 11 weeks calling for a reservation at Callaway's only to blow $40 on a parking garage. Maisie sat next to him on the orange plastic seat, and pressed her face against the dark window to watch the tunnel lights blur past. And Logan watched her profile and felt something in his chest go very quiet and very full at the same time. She looked like her mother around the eyes. He let himself think that for just a second, the way you let yourself touch a bruise to confirm it still hurts. And then he put it somewhere else and looked at the subway map on the wall across from them instead. Aunt. Calloway's occupied the ground floor of a building on East 54th Street that had been a bank in a previous century and still looked like it. High ceilings with plasterwork, warm amber lighting that made everyone inside look slightly more attractive and significantly more important than they probably were. Dark wood paneling, white tablecloths, the kind of carpet that swallowed sound. A maitre d' near the entrance with the practiced stillness of someone trained to evaluate people in under 3 seconds. Logan felt the man's eyes move over him, the too-wide tie, the mechanic's hands, the daughter with the uneven pigtails, and register something close to mild surprise. "Carter," Logan said. 7:30, party of 2. The maitre d' checked his book. Whatever he found there apparently confirmed enough. "Of course. Right this way?" They were seated near the kitchen. Logan noticed it, cataloged it, and said nothing. The table was tucked in a corner where the ambient noise from the kitchen service door created a low, persistent hiss. It wasn't the worst table in the room. That distinction belonged to a two-top wedged next to the server station. But it was clearly the table where the maitre d' put people whose reservations had come from cancellation slots called in by strangers at 8:01 on a Monday morning. "I like this spot," Maisie announced, settling into her chair and immediately opening the menu with both hands. "We can see everything." She wasn't wrong. The entire dining room spread out before them. Maybe 30 tables, perhaps 40 people at this hour, the room not yet at full capacity. Logan's eyes moved across it without any particular intention, the way they always did in any new space. Entry points, exits, sight lines. He didn't do it on purpose anymore. It was just how his brain had been rewired somewhere along the way, and he'd stopped fighting it. The center of the room was dominated by a large round table set for 8. Corporate, clearly. The suits were too consistent, the body language too careful. 6 men and 2 women, all somewhere between 40 and 60, with the particular energy of people who spent most of their lives inside boardrooms. A catered dinner, probably. Someone was celebrating something or negotiating something else. At the head of that table sat a woman who did not look like she was celebrating or negotiating. She was perhaps 30, though it was hard to be certain from across the room. Dark hair, sharp posture, wearing a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse. She was listening to the man on her left speak with the fixed, patient attention of someone who had learned that showing boredom was a tactical disadvantage. She wasn't eating yet. None of them were. The appetizers had just arrived, it looked like, small plates being distributed around the table by 2 servers moving with quiet efficiency. Logan looked at her for maybe 4 seconds. Then Maisie asked him what a porterhouse was, and he shifted his full attention to explaining it. "It's basically 2 steaks in one," he said. "The strip is on one side and the tenderloin is on the other, separated by a bone." "That sounds like too much steak," she said. "It's definitely a lot of steak." "How much does it cost?" He turned the menu so she couldn't see the prices. "Order whatever you want tonight." She studied him. "Dad? It's your birthday. How much does it cost?" "Maisie. I'm going to look it up when we get home." "Fine," he said. "Then you can be upset about it at home. Tonight we're having dinner." She looked at him for a moment longer with those 2 serious eyes, and then something in her face shifted and she smiled. A real one, not her polite one, the smile that still had a gap in it from the tooth she'd lost in March, and said, "Can I get the lobster bisque?" "You can get the lobster bisque." "And the filet?" "You can get the filet." "And the chocolate soufflé?" "How do you even know what a soufflé is?" "I watch cooking videos," she said, as if this should have been obvious. He laughed. It came out a little rough. He didn't do it enough, he knew that. But it was real. "Yeah," he said. "You can get the soufflé." She sat back in her chair with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just successfully completed a negotiation
and went back to studying the menu, and Logan flagged down their server and ordered a glass of whatever the house red was, because he was not the kind of man who knew wine by name, and he'd stopped pretending otherwise somewhere around his early 30s. The next 45 minutes were the best he could remember having in a long time. They talked about her teacher, Ms. Reyes, who was strict but actually funny sometimes if you caught her in the right mood. They talked about the feral cat that had been appearing behind the garage where Logan worked, which Maisie had named Brigadier despite never having met it. They talked about whether or not sharks dreamed, which was a question Maisie had apparently been carrying around for several weeks and wanted a definitive answer on.
Logan told her he didn't think sharks slept the way humans did, and she said that wasn't what she asked, and he said he supposed if they dreamed it would probably be about swimming and fish, and she said that seemed like a very boring dream, and he said most dreams were pretty boring when you actually described them out loud. The lobster bisque arrived and was so good it briefly ended all conversation. Logan watched his daughter close her eyes on the first spoonful and felt something private and specific and impossible to explain to anyone who didn't also have a child. The particular satisfaction of having given someone you love something that made them genuinely happy. Not a big thing, not an expensive car or a prestigious school or a future you engineered for them. Just a bowl of soup on their birthday. He was in the middle of cutting his ribeye when he heard it. It started as a cough. Nothing dramatic, the kind of thing that happens in restaurants when someone inhales a crumb wrong or a sip goes sideways. Logan heard it across the room and didn't look up immediately because it was a cough, and people coughed. Then it became something else. The second sound was harder to describe. A dry, compressed sort of straining, the particular sound of an airway doing its best and failing. Logan had heard it before in contexts he didn't think about in restaurants. His head came up. The large round table, the woman in the charcoal blazer. She was standing now, both hands at her throat. Not the universal choking sign, not quite. She was still trying to clear it herself, still in the phase where the body is insisting this will resolve on its own. Her face had gone a particular shade that Logan recognized clinically. The man on her left had scooted his chair back and was holding his napkin and saying something. The man on her right had stood up but wasn't moving toward her. The other 6 people at the table were doing what people in shock almost always do. They were looking at each other instead of the problem. 2 of the men in dark suits near the room's periphery. Security, Logan had clocked them when he came in, the earpieces and the way they stood, were moving toward each other and talking. Not toward her. Toward each other. As if they were trying to decide together whether this was the kind of thing they were supposed to handle, or whether their job description ended somewhere before emergency medicine. Logan was already out of his chair. He didn't decide to stand. His body had made that decision before his conscious mind fully finished processing what he was seeing. He was on his feet and moving across the dining room, weaving between tables, and some distant and still observant part of his brain registered the way the room's noise was dropping. The quiet spreading outward from that central table like something being poured into water. "Excuse me," he said as he reached the table, and he wasn't sure who he was saying it to. He stepped behind her. She was 5'4", maybe 5'5", and she was still standing, but barely. Her hands were still at her throat, and her eyes were searching the room with the terrifying focus of someone whose brain was starting to understand that it was not getting enough oxygen. Her face was going darker. It had been maybe 30 seconds since the first sound, maybe 40. He didn't think about it. He just did it. His left arm went around her midsection, just below her rib cage. He made a fist with his right hand, placed it correctly, wrapped his left hand over it. One firm upward and inward thrust. Then another. On the third, something dislodged. She made a sound. A sharp, awful, beautiful sound. The sound of a person's airway suddenly working again. And started coughing hard. Real coughing. Productive and ragged and desperate. Logan kept one hand at her arm, steadying her as she leaned forward over the table and coughed like her body was trying to eject the last 6 months. The room was completely silent. Not the restaurant murmur kind of quiet. Actual silence. The kind that falls on a room when everyone in it simultaneously realizes they witnessed something and aren't sure yet what it means. Logan took a step back. The security men were 3 feet away now, both of them staring at him with expressions that had shifted in ways he didn't entirely like. The man who'd been sitting on her left, middle-aged, silver hair, a face arranged into permanent authority, was staring at Logan with something behind his eyes that wasn't gratitude. The woman straightened up slowly, one hand still at her chest. Her eyes found Logan's. "You're okay," he said. Just those two words. Matter of fact, because she was. She blinked. Her eyes were dark brown, maybe black in this light. And fully focused now, that terrible vacant searching gone. She was breathing, fast, still, and shallow, but breathing. One of the security men stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to need you to—" "He's fine," the woman said. Her voice was rough, scraped raw. She said it quietly, but with a particular weight that made the security man stop where he was. She looked at Logan again, still breathing, still finding her footing. "Thank you," she said. Logan nodded once. He looked at her for a moment. This woman who'd been 30 seconds from something he didn't want to name, surrounded by a table full of people who'd done exactly nothing. And then he turned and walked back across the silent dining room to his corner table near the kitchen, where his daughter was sitting very still with her hands in her lap and her eyes very wide, watching him with that same expression she'd used for the tie. Not fear. Something more complicated than fear. He sat down, picked up his fork. "Dad?" Maisie said. "Yeah." "Is she okay?" He looked over at her. She was sitting now, the man with the silver hair bent toward her, speaking quickly. She was nodding. A server had brought water. Her color was coming back. "She's okay," Logan said. Maisie was quiet for a moment. "How did you know how to do that?" He cut another piece of steak. "First aid. Everyone should know it." She looked at him with that too-old gaze. Then she picked up her fork. "You have steak juice on your tie," she said. He checked. She was right. "It was already the funeral tie," he said. "Yeah," she said, and something in her voice had gone soft in a way that she'd probably deny tomorrow. But still. The soufflé arrived 20 minutes later, exactly as ordered. Maisie ate most of it and allowed Logan 2 bites with the magnanimous generosity of a queen granting a small territory to a loyal subject. He paid the bill without looking at the total. Somewhere across the room, a table full of powerful people were quietly rearranging themselves around what had just happened, and Logan Carter was watching his daughter scrape the last of the chocolate from the bottom of a ceramic ramekin, and neither of them said another word about any of it for the rest of the night. But the man with the silver hair, the one who'd been sitting to her left, the one whose face had arranged itself into something cold, when he looked at Logan, he had not taken his eyes off that corner table for the last 20 minutes. He was watching Logan Carter the way a person watches a problem they haven't figured out how to solve yet. Logan had not given anyone his address. That was the first thing that went through his mind when he opened the front door at 8:40 the following morning and found 2 people standing on his stoop, a woman in a charcoal blazer and a man in a suit who was clearly not there as a companion. The man stood slightly behind and to her left, shoulders squared, eyes already moving past Logan into the apartment behind him. Security, professional. The kind who'd been doing it long enough that the positioning was reflexive. Logan looked at the woman. She looked less put together than she had the night before, which surprised him. Not disheveled. She was too controlled for that. But there were shadows under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept particularly well. And she was holding a paper coffee cup with both hands like she needed something to do with them. "Mr. Carter," she said. Her voice was still slightly rough at the edges. "I'm Isabella Sterling." "I know who you are," he said. "I don't know how you found my address." "Your credit card. The restaurant ran it." He thought about that for a second. It was technically possible, if you had the right people asking the right questions of the right people, which meant she had resources and wasn't shy about using them. He filed that away. "What do you want?" he said. Not rude, just direct. She seemed to appreciate that, or at least not be put off by it. "To thank you properly, last night was—" She stopped, made a small controlled movement with her jaw. "I don't do well with owing people things." "You don't owe me anything. You saved my life." "I did the Heimlich. It took about 8 seconds. You don't need to be standing on my doorstep over 8 seconds. A beat." She looked at him steadily. Up close he could see that she was younger than he'd initially registered, maybe 29, 30 at the outside.
There was something in her face that looked like it had been trained into stillness, the kind of expression you develop when you've spent years in rooms full of people looking for weakness. "Can I come in?" she asked. Logan considered it. Maisie was at school. The apartment was its usual state of organized chaos. Dishes in the drying rack, Maisie's drawings on the refrigerator door, his work boots by the entry hall. Not the kind of place you brought a CEO, but something in the way Isabella Sterling was holding that coffee cup made him step back from the door. She came in. The security man stayed outside, which Logan respected. She stood in his kitchen and looked around with an expression that wasn't quite what he expected, not the politely concealed assessment of someone cataloging a lesser space, but something more like genuine curiosity. Her eyes stopped on Maisie's drawings, a crayon rendering of what might have been a shark, or possibly a submarine labeled Brigader, in large, uneven letters. "Your daughter?" she asked. "Yeah. The spelling is creative. She's 8. She's working on it." Isabella almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to a full one, but the corner of her mouth moved. She turned to face him, leaned her hip slightly against the kitchen counter, and the almost smile dropped. "I want to offer you a financial gift," she said. "I've already had my people look into your situation. I know about the medical debt, your daughter's appendectomy last year, the billing disputes with the insurance company. I can make that disappear." Logan's jaw tightened. "You had your people look into my situation." "I needed to understand. I didn't ask for that," he said. His voice stayed even, but something had gone flat in it. "I don't want your money, Ms. Sterling." "It's not charity, it's charity. Call it what it is." He crossed his arms. "Look, I appreciate you coming here. I understand you feel like you owe me something and it's bothering you, but I have a job. I have an apartment. I'm handling the debt on my own timeline. I don't need someone I don't know to fix my life for me." She looked at him for a long moment, not offended, more like she was recalibrating. "Most people," she said slowly, "would take the money. I'm not most people." "No," she said, quiet. "You're really not." She set her coffee cup on his counter, asked with a look if that was okay. He nodded, and was quiet for a moment in the way that meant she was deciding something. "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to anyway." "Last night, the men at my table, the 2 security personnel near the wall." She paused. "Why didn't any of them move?" Logan pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down, because this was apparently going to be more than an 8-minute conversation. "Which one do you want answered? The table or the security?" "Both?" "The people at your table were in shock mostly. A few seconds of genuine freeze response. That's normal, that's just biology. After that," he stopped, chose his words. "After that, they were watching each other. Nobody wanted to be the first one to put their hands on you. Because I'm the CEO. Because touching you uninvited in that context carries about 15 different kinds of professional liability risk, and they all knew it. By the time that calculation finished running, 15 seconds had passed." She was very still. "And my security team?" Logan was quiet for a moment. "Same question they always are when something happens fast," he said. "Was this their problem or someone else's problem? They were looking at each other instead of you." He paused. "In my experience, that's a training issue, but it can also be something else." She caught on something in those last 4 words. He watched her catch it, the slight shift in her posture, the way her eyes sharpened. "What does that mean?" she said. "It means I don't know your situation," he said, "and I shouldn't speculate about things I don't know." She didn't push it, but she didn't let it go either. He could see her holding it somewhere behind her eyes, turning it over. "Thank you," she said finally, "for being honest. I'm always honest. It's one of my less convenient qualities." She picked up her coffee cup, looked like she was about to say something else. Then her phone buzzed. Once, then immediately again, then a third time in rapid succession. And her face changed. Not dramatically, but the stillness cracked just slightly, like a surface tension breaking. She looked at the screen. Something moved through her expression that was too quick for Logan to read. "I have to go," she said. "Okay."
She moved toward the door, then stopped in the entry hall. Her back was still to him. "Mr. Carter, if I needed to reach you again, you already have my address," he said. Apparently. She turned around. The almost smile again, and this time it got slightly further. "I'll call the restaurant." She left. The security man fell in beside her on the stoop without a word, and Logan stood in his doorway and watched them reach the black car idling at the curb, and thought about the thing he hadn't said. The thing he'd noticed the night before and had been trying to decide whether it was paranoia or pattern recognition ever since. The security man with the silver earpiece, the one on the left side of the room, he'd started moving before anyone at the table had made a sound. Moved toward his partner, not toward Isabella. Like he was positioning, not responding. Logan had seen that before, too. In different contexts, different consequences. He closed the door and stood in his kitchen for a while, looking at Maisie's drawing of the shark, or the submarine. Then he went to work. Ushkok. He was elbow-deep in the undercarriage of a 2019 pickup at 2:15 that afternoon when his cell phone rang. A number he didn't recognize, Manhattan area code. He almost didn't answer it. Then he did. "Mr. Carter." It was Isabella Sterling. Her voice was different than it had been that morning, tighter. The control was still there, but it was working harder. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "I already told you. That's not a problem." "Last night, at the restaurant." A pause. "Did anything about my security team seem off to you?" Logan set down his wrench, slowly. "Why are you asking me this now?" "Because this morning, 2 hours after I left your apartment, I had a meeting with my chief operating officer, Damian Cross." She said the name with a flatness that held something underneath it. "He told me he'd filed a police complaint against you, alleging that you assaulted me at the restaurant last night." The words landed in the quiet of the garage, and Logan let them sit there for a second. "He filed it this morning," Logan said. "Yes. Without talking to you first. He says he was acting in my interest, that you could have seriously injured me, that the Heimlich, improperly applied, can cause significant internal trauma." Her voice didn't waver, but something behind it was very tight. "He's provided a statement from a physician. He has 2 witnesses at the table who've signed onto the complaint." Logan turned this over carefully. He was not a man who jumped to conclusions, but he was also not a man who ignored evidence when it arranged itself into a shape he recognized. "Ms. Sterling, did you authorize that complaint?" "No." "Does your COO typically take legal action on your behalf without your authorization?" "No," she said. "He does not." A silence. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I need to ask you directly. My security team last night, what did you actually see?" He leaned against the truck. The garage was empty except for him, his coworker Eddie, having left for a parts run 20 minutes ago. "I saw 2 men who moved when the sound started. They moved toward each other, not toward you." "Moved toward each other," she repeated. "Like they were coordinating on something, not responding to an emergency." He paused. "I could be wrong. I don't know your people's protocols." "They don't have a protocol that involves moving toward each other when I'm in medical distress," she said quietly. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "There's something else," she said. "I've been going through my calendar this morning. 3 weeks ago, Damian restructured the security team assignments. He changed the rotation himself, which is not normally his responsibility. The 2 men who were in the restaurant last night, they were specifically assigned to that dinner by Damian." The shape of it was becoming clearer. Logan didn't like the shape. "Ms. Sterling," he said carefully, "what I'm hearing, I want to be clear, is speculation. You need people who can actually investigate this, not a mechanic." "I know that," she said, "but I also know that I currently have a COO who may have just attempted to have me killed, who is now trying to have the only person who helped me charged with a crime, and whose next move I genuinely cannot predict." A brief, controlled pause. "My corporate security apparatus reports to Damian. My legal team was appointed under his recommendation. I don't know right now who in my own organization I can trust." Logan stared at the concrete floor. He could hear traffic from outside the garage. Normal midday city noise, someone somewhere honking a horn. I'm a mechanic, he said again. Not a deflection, just a fact he wanted to put on the table. I know what you are, she said. Or part of it. Another pause and her voice shifted slightly. Less controlled, more precise. I had my research team pull everything publicly available on you this morning. After our conversation, I wanted to understand who I was dealing with. United States Navy. 8 years of service, 2 tours. Your separation papers list your rating as hospital corpsman, but there's a gap in your official record that my people couldn't account for, and men with that kind of gap usually weren't just medics. Logan said nothing. I'm not asking you to confirm anything, she said. I'm just telling you that I understand the difference between someone who got lucky with a Heimlich and someone who moved across that room the way you did. She let that sit for a second. I have a proposition. A real one, not charity. I'm listening. I want to offer you a position, head of executive security, reporting directly and only to me. You would have full authority to restructure the team, remove whoever you determine to be a problem, and implement whatever protocols you believe are necessary. A breath. I'll pay you 3 times whatever you're currently making. Benefits, housing allowance, and your daughter's educational expenses covered through college. Logan was quiet for long enough that she said, Mr. Carter? I heard you, he said. I'm thinking. He was thinking about several things at once. He was thinking about the fact that a man he'd never met had filed a criminal complaint against him this morning, which meant that a man he'd never met considered him a problem significant enough to move against. He was thinking about what happened to people who became problems to men like that, men with resources and organization and no apparent hesitation. He was thinking about Maisie at school right now, in her classroom, knowing nothing about any of this. He was also thinking about the security man moving toward his partner instead of toward Isabella. He was thinking about what that meant for what might come next. The assault complaint, he said. If I take this position, that doesn't go away. I'm withdrawing my cooperation from the complaint immediately. Without my testimony, it doesn't hold. Damian Cross can still push it. He can try, she said, and something in her voice had sharpened into something that wasn't quite anger, but was adjacent to it. Mr. Carter, I am still the CEO of this company. Until someone proves otherwise in a court of law, I have the authority to make this offer, and I intend to exercise it. Logan was quiet again. Outside the garage, a truck rumbled past. My daughter, he said finally. If I do this, she's not involved, she doesn't come near any of this. Agreed. I need to be able to restructure the team completely. Anyone I determine is a liability, they're gone. No pushback from you, no override. Agreed. And I'm going to need access to personnel files. Everyone on your current security roster, everyone in your executive inner circle, and specifically everything you have on Damian Cross. A pause. That's sensitive information. I know, he said. That's why I need it. Another pause, longer this time. Then, agreed. Logan looked at the truck he'd been working on. An ordinary Tuesday afternoon job, brake lines, and a leaking gasket. The kind of problem that had a clean solution if you knew what you were doing. I'll need a week to arrange things on my end, he said. You have 3 days, she said. I'm sorry, I know that's not... 3 days is fine, he said. Because it was. He could move fast when he needed to. He'd had a lot of practice. He did not tell Maisie everything. She was 8, and there were categories of things that 8-year-olds should not have to carry, and the specific details of corporate conspiracy and potential premeditated harm were firmly in that category. What he told her was that he'd gotten a new job, a security job, working for a company in the city, and that it paid better, and he thought it was a good opportunity. She looked at him across the dinner table with her soup spoon halfway to her mouth and said, What kind of security job? Protecting someone important. Like a bodyguard. Something like that. Who? A businesswoman. CEO of a tech company. Maisie put her spoon down. Is it the lady from the restaurant? Logan paused. Why would you think that? Because she looked at you for a long time when you walked back to our table, Maisie said, with the matter-of-fact accuracy of a child who notices things adults think they're too small to notice.
And you looked at her security guys weird. I didn't look at anyone weird. Dad, you have a specific face you make when you're thinking about whether something is a problem. She picked her spoon back up. You made that face at her security guys. Logan looked at his daughter, 8 years old and could read a room better than most people he'd served with. Yeah, he said. It's the lady from the restaurant. Maisie nodded slowly, processing. Is she in trouble? Might be. Is that why you're taking the job? Not for the money? He could have said it was for the money. It would have been easier, but he and Maisie had a particular arrangement, unspoken but solid, about honesty with each other. He didn't talk down to her, and she didn't pretend not to understand things she understood. Both, he said. But mostly yeah, because I think she needs someone who actually knows what they're doing. Maisie ate a spoonful of soup, thought about it. Is it dangerous? I don't know yet. She thought about that too, in her methodical way. Okay, she said finally. Okay? I'm not going to tell you not to do something you think is right, she said. That would be annoying. She paused. But you have to text me back when I text you, every time. Deal. And no dying, she said, very matter of fact, like she was adding an item to a grocery list. I'll do my best. That's not the same as promising. No, he said, it's not. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to her soup. You should probably get a better tie for the new job, she said. Something that doesn't have steak on it. What? The first morning, Logan walked into the Sterling Technologies executive floor. He wore a plain dark jacket, a white shirt with no tie, and the field watch. He had his personnel files, the 18 members of the current security team, plus cross-referenced background from the corporate HR system Isabella had given him access to. And he had spent the previous 2 evenings reading every page. What he found took him most of the first evening to be sure he was reading correctly, because part of him didn't want to be reading it correctly. 4 members of the current security roster had irregularities in their background documentation. Not obvious forgeries, but the kind of subtle inconsistencies that only stood out if you knew what employment records from specific agencies were supposed to look like. 2 of those 4 were the men from the restaurant. By the end of the second evening, he had cross-referenced their assignment histories against Damian Cross's calendar and found 11 instances over the past 8 months where those specific personnel had been positioned during events or meetings where Isabella was present, always assigned in pairs, always positioned at the exit-adjacent posts. Logan sat at his kitchen table at 11:30 at night looking at his notes, Maisie asleep down the hall, the apartment quiet. This was not improvised. Someone had been patient. Someone had been building this for months, moving pieces into position with the careful methodology of a person who didn't expect to fail, and who fully intended that when it finally happened, whatever it finally was, it would look like something else entirely. He thought about the restaurant, the specific table where Isabella had been sitting, the appetizers arriving at exactly the moment she'd started eating, the timing of it. He picked up his phone and called her. It was late. She answered on the second ring, which told him she wasn't sleeping either. The restaurant dinner, he said, without preamble. 3 weeks ago, was it originally a different venue? A pause. Yes. We moved it to Callaway's 4 days before because of a private event at the original location. Who handled the rebooking? Another pause, longer. Damian's assistant. He said he'd take care of it because his team had a contact there. Logan was quiet. Mr. Carter, she said, and her voice was very careful. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, he said slowly, that the dinner wasn't a coincidence. And I'm thinking that whatever was supposed to happen at that table last Thursday night, I don't think choking was the original plan. I think it was the backup. The silence on the other end of the line was the particular silence of someone absorbing something they'd been afraid was coming. The encrypted communications on his corporate device, Logan continued. Can your IT security team pull those? They'd need authorization from... She stopped. From the board. Or from me, if I classify it as an active security investigation. Another pause. I can classify it as an active security investigation. Do that, Logan said.
First thing tomorrow. What are we going to find? She asked. Logan thought about the two security men with their careful positioning, about Damian Cross moving against him the morning after, fast and organized, about the particular patience of someone who'd been running this play for 8 months. Enough, he said. I think we're going to find enough. He hung up, sat for a while in his quiet kitchen. Down the hall, Maisie shifted in her sleep and said something unintelligible, the way she sometimes did, and then went quiet again. Logan put his notes in order, capped his pen, and went to make sure the locks were done. The encrypted communications took 4 days to pull. Logan spent those 4 days doing what he did when he was waiting on something he couldn't control. He worked. He went through the security team roster person by person, conducting what he called informal orientation meetings that were actually something closer to structured interviews. He sat across from each member of Isabella's protection detail in a small conference room on the 31st floor and asked them questions that sounded administrative and weren't. He was looking for 2 things, competence and loyalty, and specifically the order in which people prioritized them. Most of the team was clean, career professionals who'd come up through law enforcement or private security firms, doing a job they were good at, with no particular investment in the politics of the executive floor above them. Logan kept 8 of them. The other 10 he reassigned to roles that took them out of Isabella's immediate orbit: building security, logistics, overnight desk rotations. He did it quietly and without explanation, because explanations created arguments, and arguments created delays, and he didn't have time for either. The 2 men from the restaurant, Marcus Teller and a man named Roy Speaks, he suspended pending investigation on the second day, citing documentation irregularities. Damian Cross sent him an email about it within the hour. The email was polite. It was also a warning, worded with the particular precision of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Logan read it twice, filed it, and did not respond. On the morning of the 5th day, Isabella's head of IT security, a compact, wire-thin woman named Priya Agarwal, who wore her badge lanyard twisted into a knot and communicated primarily in the declarative tense, knocked on Logan's office door and put a flash drive on his desk without sitting down. 47 encrypted messages, she said. Corporate server, Damian Cross's executive account, sent over a period of 6 months. Decryption was straightforward once we had authorization because he used the company's own encryption architecture, which was either arrogant or stupid. I can't decide which. Probably both, Logan said. Probably, she agreed. The recipient is a shell address, 3 layers of forwarding, but the content is clear enough that the forwarding doesn't really matter. She looked at the drive. It's bad. I know. I mean specifically bad, not corporate politics bad, the kind that has mandatory reporting requirements. I know, Logan said again. That's why we're going to be very precise about how we use it. Priya looked at him for a moment with the evaluating expression of someone deciding whether they trusted a person they'd only known for 5 days. Then she nodded once and left. Logan plugged in the drive and read for 3 hours straight, taking notes in a small notebook with a mechanical pencil, the kind he'd used in the service because the ink and ballpoints did unpredictable things in certain temperatures. By the time he finished reading, the notebook had 4 pages of tight handwriting, and his coffee had gone completely cold. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a while. Then he called Isabella. I need an hour of your time tonight, he said. Just us. No assistants, no other staff. A brief pause. My office, 7 o'clock. Not your office, he said. Yes, sorry, somewhere Damian's people haven't had physical access to in the last 6 months. He thought for a second. The building has a 33rd floor conference room that's been under renovation. Key access only, no scheduled meetings. Another pause, longer. You think my office is compromised? I think I'd rather be certain before we have this conversation. She was quiet for a moment. 7 o'clock, she said. 33rd floor. The conference room still had plastic sheeting over the windows and the smell of fresh paint and construction adhesive. Logan arrived 20 minutes early and checked the room the way he checked every room now, out of habit that had gone so deep it barely registered as a conscious act anymore. He found nothing. That was the expected outcome, and he still needed to confirm it. Isabella arrived at 7 with 2 paper cups of coffee from the cart in the lobby downstairs, which he hadn't expected. She handed him one without ceremony and stood at the far end of the uncovered section of the conference table, looking at him with the expression she wore when she was bracing for something. "Tell me," she said. He opened the notebook. 6 months ago, Damien began communicating through a secondary channel with at least 2 members of your board, Victor Hale and Carol Wen, laying out a legal strategy for invoking the company's incapacitation clause. The clause exists in your founding charter and allows the board to remove the CEO by majority vote in the event of a documented medical or cognitive incapacitation. Isabella's face didn't move. "I'm aware of the clause." He wasn't planning to invoke it through normal channels. He was planning to manufacture the grounds. Logan kept his voice flat and informational because that was the only register that would get them both through this cleanly. The messages detail a staged succession. The plan required a medical event, something documented, witnessed, with enough ambiguity in the aftermath to allow a physician friendly to Damien's position to testify about potential neurological consequences. Isabella set her coffee cup down, carefully. "The choking incident," she said, "was not accidental," Logan said. "Based on what's in these messages, the original approach was different. I don't have full details on what the earlier plan was, only that it was scrapped 3 months ago and replaced with this one. What I can tell you is that the dinner at Callaway's was selected specifically because the venue has a documented history of food handling incidents, which would have provided cover. The appetizer course was the delivery mechanism. Something in it was intended to trigger a severe anaphylactic reaction." Isabella was very still. "You don't have a documented nut allergy," Logan continued, "but sesame can cause a first-time anaphylactic response in adults with no prior history, and it's harder to trace than nuts because labeling regulations are less consistent. A severe reaction at a crowded restaurant, confusion, airway compromise, delayed emergency response because your security team hesitated, and if it went far enough, the medical outcome would have supported the incapacitation narrative." "If it went far enough," she said. Her voice was controlled, but something behind it was not. "Yes." "And if I survived?" Then Damien had the medical witness ready to testify that oxygen deprivation during a prolonged airway incident, even a recovered one, can cause cognitive effects that aren't immediately obvious: brain fog, memory issues, impaired judgment. Things that are real medical phenomena and also very difficult to definitively disprove without extensive independent evaluation, which would take time the board wasn't inclined to give. Isabella turned away from him. She walked to the plastic-sheeted window and stood there with her back to him, and he gave her a moment because she'd earned a moment. When she turned back around, her face was composed again, but her eyes were doing something complicated. "Teller and speaks," she said. "They were supposed to let it progress." "Yes. The message chain includes a payment structure. 2 transfers, both to accounts I've forwarded to a forensic accountant Isabella's outside legal team retained this afternoon. The first transfer was made 4 months ago. The second was contingent on outcome. The second payment hasn't been made because the outcome didn't happen," Logan said. She looked at him with something that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite grief and was possibly both at once. "Because you happened," she said. He didn't answer that directly. The issue now is what Damien does with the information that his plan failed and that there's an investigation building around it. He's not stupid. He knows we pulled the IT records. He knows I've been restructuring the team. He's going to move soon, and he's going to move through the board because that's the channel where he still has leverage. "Victor and Carol," she said, "they received money too. Not as much, and the message chain suggests they thought they were participating in a legal corporate restructuring, not a—" He paused, chose the word precisely. "Not what it actually was. That distinction matters legally, but right now it also matters tactically, because it means they might be peelable if the right pressure is applied before Damien gets to them first." Isabella absorbed this. She'd been quiet in the processing way, not the overwhelmed way, and Logan had noticed early that those were different things with her. When she was overwhelmed, she went brittle. When she was processing, she went very still and very focused, and she was focused now. He's going to call an emergency board meeting, she said. It's the fastest move he has. If he can get a majority vote before we can put the criminal evidence in front of the right people, he can remove me and then spend his money and his lawyers making the communications look like something else. That's my read too, Logan said. How fast can he call a meeting? With a medical justification, and the assault complaint, discredited as it is, still gives him a piece of paper with the word injury on it. He can call one with 48 hours notice. So we have 48 hours, maybe less. She nodded. What do we do? Logan flipped back 2 pages in his notebook. First, we get the forensic account analysis completed and in the hands of Isabella's outside legal counsel tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Second, I need the name of the physician Damien has been working with, the one who is going to testify about cognitive effects. He's referenced in 3 of the messages, but only by specialty and hospital affiliation. Neurology, she said. Dr. Alan Frost. He's at Meridian Medical Center. I know the name. He presented at a conference our wellness division sponsored last year. I didn't know he had a relationship with Damien. He may not have known what he was being recruited into, Logan said, or he may have known exactly. Either way, his testimony is the technical center of Damien's medical argument. If we can undermine that testimony specifically and completely with documented medical counter-evidence presented by someone with unimpeachable credentials, the incapacitation argument falls apart even if Damien manages to call the meeting. Isabella looked at him. What kind of credentials are unimpeachable in this context? Combat medicine, Logan said quietly. Battlefield trauma experience. Someone who has assessed and managed acute airway emergencies in the field, who can speak to what oxygen deprivation during a choking incident actually produces neurologically, and more specifically, what it does not produce in a patient who recovered in under 60 seconds with no loss of consciousness. She looked at him for a long moment. You. Me, he said. If you're comfortable with what that requires me to disclose about my background. Your service record. Parts of it. He paused. Some of it's still classified. But the medical training isn't. And there are people I can reach who can verify my qualifications in ways that will hold up in front of a board. Isabella picked up her coffee cup again. She was quiet for a moment. You said when we first spoke that you didn't want to tell people about your background. I said I don't explain myself to people who haven't earned it, Logan said. This is different. This is tactical. She nodded slowly. All right. A beat. Logan. It was the first time she'd used his first name. He noticed it. Thank you, she said. Not for the restaurant, for this. He picked up his own coffee. It was cold, but he drank it anyway. Let's see how the next 48 hours go first. They did not have 48 hours. Damien called the emergency board meeting the following morning at 9:15 with a notice time-stamped 9:03 a.m. Samishem, citing, as Isabella had predicted, the documentation from the assault complaint and a preliminary letter from Dr. Alan Frost suggesting that patients recovering from severe choking incidents should undergo neurological evaluation before resuming executive decision-making responsibilities. The meeting was set for 2 o'clock that afternoon. Logan found out at 9:20 when Isabella forwarded him the notice with a single line of text beneath it. He moved faster than we thought. He was already at his desk. He'd been at his desk since 6:30, and before that he'd been on the phone with 2 people. A former Navy colleague named Hendricks, who now worked in private forensic accounting in Baltimore, and a woman named Dr. Corinne Bass, who had spent 12 years as a flight surgeon with the United States Navy and was currently a trauma medicine consultant at a hospital in New Jersey, and who owed Logan Carter a favor that neither of them had ever precisely quantified. When he read Isabella's message, he called Dr. Bass back. Meetings today, he said. 2 o'clock. Of course it is, she said, without particular surprise. She had the particular equanimity of someone who had spent years in environments where things consistently went wrong faster than expected. I'll be there by 1:30. Send me everything you have on the Frost letter. Forwarding now. Logan. Yeah. You're going to have to talk about Kandahar. He was quiet for a second. I know. Are you okay with that? No, he said honestly. But I'll do it anyway. He heard something in her end of the line that might have been a quiet exhale. "I'll see you at 1:30, she said, and hung up. The next 4 hours were the most organized chaos Logan had managed since leaving the service. Priya printed and compiled the relevant sections of the encrypted communications. Not all 47 messages, but the 12 most specific, with the financial records attached and the payment structures highlighted. Isabella's outside legal counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Cho, who'd been practicing corporate law for 30 years and had the effect of someone who found most crises mildly boring, arrived at 11 and spent 2 hours with Logan and Priya going through everything. "The communications are solid," Margaret said at the end of those 2 hours. "The chain of custody is clean because Priya pulled them through proper authorization, and they've been handled correctly since. The financial records are compelling. The problem is timing. We cannot get a criminal referral processed before 2 o'clock today, which means we're walking into that boardroom with evidence that is real and complete and has not yet been officially validated by any law enforcement body." "Is that a problem?" Logan asked. "It depends on the board," she said. "Victor Hale and Carol Wen have been primed by Damien for months. The others," she flipped through her notes. "Portman, Ashby, Nakamura, and D'Souza are the swing votes. They're not corrupt. They're cautious. They will want to believe the evidence, but they'll also want cover. They'll want a reason to vote against Damien's motion that doesn't expose them to liability for acting on unverified materials." "What gives them that cover?" Logan asked. Margaret looked at him over her reading glasses. "You do," she said. "Your testimony about the medical argument is the cleanest piece of it. If the medical case falls apart credibly in that room, in front of witnesses, Damien's majority dissolves. Then the financial evidence becomes the thing that buries him rather than the thing they're being asked to evaluate under pressure." Logan nodded. He understood the sequencing. Destroy the medical argument first, then produce the financial evidence into a room that's already turned. At 1:45, Logan and Dr. Corinne Bass stood in the hallway outside the 32nd floor boardroom. She was 51, compact, gray at the temples, wearing a blazer she'd clearly driven straight from the hospital in. She had a leather folder under one arm that contained her credentials, a printed summary of the relevant medical literature, and 3 pages of notes she'd written on her phone's notepad app during the train ride from New Jersey and transferred to paper in the elevator. "You ready?" she said. "No," Logan said. "Good," she said. "People who say they're ready are usually the ones who fall apart in there." She straightened her folder. "How long since you've talked about Kandahar?" "To anyone outside of the VA process? Never." She nodded. "Then talk about it like a report, not like a memory. Clinical language, sequential, present tense. The room doesn't need your feelings about it. It needs the facts." "I know how to debrief," he said. "I know you do," she said. "I'm reminding you anyway because this is a boardroom and not a debrief, and it's going to feel wrong. Say it out loud before you go in." He looked at her. "Say what out loud?" "That you're doing this for Maisie," she said. "You don't have to mean it right now. Just say it. It'll give your nervous system something to hold on to." He thought about his daughter at school right now, in her classroom, knowing nothing about this room or this building or the specific weight of what he was about to walk into. He thought about her sitting on the couch in her yellow flowered dress at 6 o'clock on her birthday, hands folded in her lap, waiting for him. "I'm doing this for Maisie," he said quietly. "Okay," Corinne said. "Let's go." The boardroom was larger than Logan had expected. A long oval table in dark wood, 12 chairs, a projector screen at the far end currently displaying the Sterling Technologies logo. 7 of the chairs were occupied. Victor Hale sat to Damien's immediate right, Carol Wen 2 seats down. The 4 others, Portman, Ashby, Nakamura, D'Souza, were distributed around the table with the careful neutrality of people who hadn't yet decided what they were about to do. Damien Cross was at the head of the table. Logan had seen his photograph but not yet met him in person, and there was always a recalibration required when you went from a photograph to a live person in a room. Damien Cross was 53, well-built in the way of someone who used the gym as another form of performance, silver-haired, and Logan recognized with a cold sort of clarity that he was the man who had been sitting to Isabella's left at Calloway's, the man who had stood up and held his napkin and not moved. The man whose eyes had followed Logan back across the restaurant to his corner table. Damien looked at Logan as he entered, and something in his expression did a quick, well-controlled adjustment. He hadn't expected Logan to walk in. He'd expected Isabella to walk in. Isabella was already seated, at the opposite head of the table, which was an assertion Logan noted with something like approval. She had her hands flat on the table in front of her, and her face was still. "This is an executive board meeting," Damien said, his voice carrying the comfortable authority of someone who had been the most powerful person in most rooms for a long time. "Non-board members aren't part of this proceeding." "Mr. Carter is here in his capacity as Chief of Executive Security," Isabella said. "And Dr. Bass is here as a consulting medical expert. Both are relevant to the medical claims being made in support of this motion." Damien's eyes moved to Corinne. Something shifted briefly in his expression. "The medical documentation has already been submitted. Dr. Frost's letter is on record." "Then it should hold up to examination," Logan said. Damien looked at him. It was a careful look, the kind that was doing a great deal of work behind very controlled eyes. "Mr. Carter, you're facing a pending—" "The complaint was withdrawn by the only complaining party," Margaret Cho said from the doorway, where she had appeared without fanfare, closing the door behind her. "Ms. Sterling withdrew her cooperation 4 days ago. The remaining documentation is currently under review by the Manhattan DA's office in connection with a separate investigation." She set her briefcase on the table and opened it with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had been doing this for 30 years. "Shall we proceed?" The 4 swing votes, Portman, Ashby, Nakamura, D'Souza, were paying very close attention now. Damien recovered quickly. He was good. Logan gave him that. "The motion before this board concerns Isabella's fitness to continue as CEO following a documented medical incident. The board has a fiduciary responsibility." "I'd like to address the medical documentation first," Logan said. "You're not a physician," Victor Hale said sharply. He was 60, with the specific irritability of a man who'd allied himself to a position and was now watching it become complicated. "No," Logan said. "I'm a former Navy hospital corpsman and combat medic with 8 years of field experience, including deployment in environments requiring advanced airway management and neurological triage without immediate access to hospital resources." He paused. "I'd also like to note for the record that I was present during the incident in question, and Dr. Frost was not. Dr. Frost is a licensed neurologist. Dr. Bass is a licensed physician with a specialty in trauma medicine and 12 years of experience as a flight surgeon," Logan said. "She reviewed Dr. Frost's letter this morning." He looked at Corinne. Corinne opened her folder. "Dr. Frost's letter references, and I'm summarizing accurately, the risk of post-hypoxic neurological effects in patients who have experienced acute airway obstruction. That is a real medical phenomenon. His letter implies, without stating explicitly, that Ms. Sterling may have experienced measurable cognitive impact from the incident at Callaway's." She looked up. "The problem with this claim is that it requires a duration and severity of hypoxic exposure that did not occur." "You weren't there either," Carol Wen said. "No," Corinne agreed, "but Mr. Carter was. And in his capacity as the individual who performed the emergency intervention, his account of the incident's timeline constitutes primary clinical witness testimony." She looked at Logan. "Mr. Carter, how long was the airway obstruction complete?" "From the moment I identified complete obstruction by visual assessment, cyanotic coloring beginning at the lips, bilateral hand position, absence of productive cough, to the moment of clearance was approximately 30 to 40 seconds. He said it the way Corinne had told him to, clinical, sequential, present tense. "Did Ms. Sterling lose consciousness at any point?" "No." "Was there any period of unresponsiveness, confusion, or disorientation following clearance?" "She was oriented and verbally responsive within seconds of clearance. Her first coherent statement was made within approximately 10 seconds. Corinne looked back at the board. Clinically significant post-hypoxic neurological effects require sustained oxygen deprivation well beyond what Mr. Carter has described. We're talking about durations measured in minutes, not seconds, and typically involving loss of consciousness. What Ms. Sterling experienced was an acute but brief episode that was resolved before it reached the threshold that would produce the effects Dr. Frost's letter implies." She closed her folder.
His letter is technically accurate in describing real medical phenomena. It is misleading in implying those phenomena apply to this specific case, given the documented timeline of the incident. The room was quiet. Logan watched the 4 swing votes. Portman, a heavy-set man in his 60s who'd been watching Logan since he walked in, was leaning back in his chair now with an expression that was doing the specific calculation Logan had hoped to see. Ashby was looking at Damien. Nakamura and D'Souza were looking at each other. Damien's jaw was tight. This is one perspective on the medical evidence. The board is entitled to weigh. I have something else, Logan said. He reached into the folder Margaret Cho slid across the table to him. He pulled out 12 printed pages. Communications, the financial records, organized and labeled, and set them on the table. He didn't distribute them yet. He just set them there.
These are excerpts from 47 encrypted communications retrieved from Damien Cross's corporate email account under authorization from Ms. Sterling in her capacity as CEO, consistent with the company's security investigation protocols. He looked at Damien when he said the next part. They document 6 months of planning for a staged medical incapacitation scenario, including payments made to 2 members of Ms. Sterling's security team for the purpose of ensuring a delayed emergency response during a life-threatening incident. He paused. The incident that occurred at Calloway's restaurant 12 days ago. The silence that fell was different from the earlier ones. Earlier silences had been the silence of a room processing competing arguments. This one was the silence of a room that had just had the floor shift under it. Victor Hale's face had gone the particular color of someone whose blood pressure was doing something complicated. Carol Wen had gone very still, and Logan recognized in her stillness not the stillness of guilt, but of someone recalculating what they had actually agreed to and how far it actually went. Damien Cross stood up. "This is fabricated," he said. His voice was still controlled, still carrying that authority, but something in it had changed. There was effort in it now, where before there had been ease. "This is a retaliation campaign by an employee with a personal..." "The chain of custody is documented," Priya Agarwal said from the doorway, where she had arrived at some point in the last 5 minutes and been standing with the quiet patience of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Authorization timestamp, retrieval log, forensic accounting of the financial transfers, all filed with outside legal counsel as of 11:47 this morning. She held up a tablet showing a timestamped document log. "I'll answer technical questions if the board has them." Damien looked at her, then at Logan, then at Isabella, who had not moved or spoken since the first exchange. She was looking at him with an expression Logan had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not triumph. Something much simpler and much more devastating than either. The look of a person who had known someone for years and was seeing them clearly for the first time, and finding the sight of it almost unbearable. "Damien," she said quietly. He looked at her. "Sit down," she said. He didn't. But the authority was gone from his posture now, replaced by something else. The specific posture of a man watching his carefully constructed architecture collapse in real time and still running calculations about whether any part of it could be salvaged. "I want legal counsel present before..." "You can call your attorney," Margaret Cho said pleasantly. "The materials in front of this board have already been transmitted to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office as of 45 minutes ago. Your attorney will likely have received notification shortly." Damien Cross looked around the room. At Victor Hale, who was looking at the table. At Carol Wen, who was looking at her hands. At Portman and Ashby and Nakamura and D'Souza, none of whom were looking at him. For the first time since Logan had walked into the room, Damien Cross looked like what he actually was. A man whose plan had reached its end, standing in a room full of people who now knew exactly what kind of plan it had been. The door at the back of the room opened. 2 uniformed officers and a man in a suit who moved like a detective stepped inside, unhurried, with the particular calm of people who had paperwork and time on their side. Isabella was still sitting with her hands flat on the table in front of her. She didn't watch Damien Cross when the detective spoke to him. She was looking at Logan instead, with an expression he found difficult to hold for too long without looking elsewhere. So he looked at the table, and then at the window, and then at his notebook where he'd written 4 pages of tight handwriting 2 nights ago in his kitchen after Maisie had gone to sleep. The handwriting was ordinary, the kind of notes any prepared person might take. But underneath the last entry, in the margin, in smaller letters than the rest, he'd written, "Don't let it get to her." He hadn't meant the evidence, he'd meant whatever came next. He was still working on that part. They took Damien Cross out through the main lobby. Logan had suggested the service entrance. Quieter, less exposure, fewer variables. But the detective in charge, a heavy-set man named Caruso, who had the permanently tired expression of someone who'd been doing this job for 25 years and had lost the capacity for surprise, said the warrant was a public document and there was no legal basis for managing the optics of an arrest. So they went through the lobby, and the lobby was not empty at 4:15 on a Wednesday afternoon, and by the time the elevator reached the ground floor, there were already people with phones out. Logan watched from the second-floor mezzanine. He watched Damien Cross walk through the glass and marble atrium of the building he'd spent 6 months trying to take, hands cuffed in front of him. They'd done him that courtesy, cuffed in front, which Caruso had not been required to do, with the particular posture of a man who understood that the next 24 hours would define how the rest of his life was discussed by people who'd once returned his calls immediately. He did not look up. Logan had half expected him to. In his experience, certain kinds of men couldn't resist a final look. Up at the building, back at the room, toward the person they'd been trying to destroy. Some defiance, some anger, some last performance of dignity. Damien Cross walked out through the revolving door without looking back at anything, and that told Logan something about him that none of the encrypted messages had. That the man was a strategist even in defeat, already calculating the next position. And that made him precisely the kind of person who would be dangerous again someday in some other context. But that was someone else's problem now. Logan turned from the mezzanine railing and went back upstairs. The boardroom had been quiet for 20 minutes by the time he returned. Margaret Cho was gathering her materials with the methodical efficiency of someone billing by the hour. Priya had taken her tablet and left without ceremony. Victor Hale and Carol Wen were both on their phones on opposite sides of the room, conducting conversations in voices too low to read, and Logan didn't need to read them to understand what they were about. Lawyers, both of them, working the problem of their own exposure before the problem worked them. Isabella was still at her end of the table. She hadn't moved. Her hands were flat on the surface in front of her, the same position she'd held through the entire meeting, and for a moment Logan wondered if she was all right. Not medically, but the other kind of all right. The kind that's harder to assess and slower to recover from. He walked to the far end of the room and sat down, not directly across from her, but at an angle, 2 seats down, close enough for a conversation that didn't require projecting across an empty room. "The board needs to vote," he said, "to formally restore your authority. Margaret says the procedural record needs to be clean." Isabella looked at him. Her eyes were focused and clear, but there was something exhausted behind them. Not the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept, but the deeper kind. "I know," she said. "Are you ready to do that?" "In a minute." She looked at the table. "I hired him," she said. "Damien, 7 years ago. He was the first COO I ever brought on. Before that, I'd been running everything myself because I didn't trust anyone else to understand what I was building." A pause. "He gave me a very good reason to trust him for a very long time." Logan didn't say anything. She wasn't asking for a response. "I keep trying to identify the moment," she said. "The moment it changed. Whether there was one specific thing that turned him, or whether it was always in him, and I just didn't see it." She looked up. "Does that make sense?" "Yeah," he said. "It makes sense." "Did you ever—" She stopped, reconsidered the question. "In your experience, people you served with or worked alongside, did you ever miss something that turned out to be significant?" "Once," he said. She waited. He wasn't going to elaborate, and she seemed to understand that, because she didn't press. She just nodded, a small controlled movement, and looked back at the table. "The answer to your question," Logan said carefully, "is that it's usually both. A capacity that was always there, and a specific set of conditions that activated it. Most people don't become something they weren't capable of becoming. They just find the right set of pressures." He paused. "Doesn't make it your fault you didn't see it." "I was supposed to be better at reading people than that," she said. "You're good at reading people in the context you know," he said. "Corporate environments, negotiations, rooms where everyone's performing something. Damien performed correctly in all of those rooms for 7 years. He looked at her steadily. What he was doing wasn't in a register you'd normally be reading for. She absorbed this. Then she sat up slightly, the way she did when she was putting something away. Not resolving it, but filing it somewhere she could return to later when she had the space for it. "The board," she said. "The board," he agreed. She stood. Logan stood. They walked back to the center of the table, and Portman, Ashby, Nakamura, and D'Souza, who had been waiting with the patience of people who had already made up their minds, reconvened around them, and at 4:37 p.m., the board of Sterling Technologies voted unanimously. Victor Hale and Carol Wen abstaining, which was as much of a concession as Logan expected from either of them, to reaffirm Isabella Sterling as Chief Executive Officer with full authority intact. It took 6 minutes. Isabella thanked them each by name, briefly and specifically, without performance. Logan watched her do it and thought that this was probably the most natural he'd seen her in any professional context since he'd known her. Not commanding, not strategic, just direct. Like the meeting had stripped something away that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. When the last board member filed out, she stood alone at the head of the table, and Logan was collecting the printed materials from his end, and she said, "Logan." He looked up. "The medical debt," she said. "I want to handle it, not as charity, as part of your compensation package, retroactive to your hire date. Margaret can structure it so it's legally clean." He'd been expecting this. He'd had a week to think about how he was going to respond to it when it came. "All right," he said. She blinked. Whatever she'd prepared for, it wasn't that. "All right?" "Yeah." He stacked the papers evenly and slid them back into the folder. "Maisie's been eating cereal for dinner twice a week because I'm managing a payment plan on 2 hospital bills. I'm done pretending that's fine." He closed the folder. "But I want it in writing, part of the contract, so it's not a favor, it's compensation." "Done," she said. "And I want to review my team's contracts, the 8 I kept. I want to make sure they're being paid correctly." "Also done." He picked up the folder. "Then we're good." She was quiet for a second. "That's it? After everything today, that's your list?" "What else would be on my list?" She shook her head, but something had shifted in her expression. Lighter than it had been, not happy exactly, but less weighted. "Most people in your position would be making significantly more demands." "I'm not most people," he said. "You told me that yourself." She almost laughed. It didn't quite make it out, but it was close. A sound in her throat, brief and unguarded. And Logan thought it was probably the most unrehearsed thing he'd seen her do. The next 72 hours were administrative in the way that only post-crisis situations can be. Dense and specific and relentless. The kind of work that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but is actually the most load-bearing part of everything that comes after. Margaret Cho's firm filed the criminal referral documentation with the DA's office in a package that Caruso later described, with the particular economy of a man who didn't compliment things easily, as thorough. Teller and Speaks were taken in for questioning on Thursday morning, and by Thursday afternoon both had retained lawyers, and one of them, Teller, had made the calculation that cooperation was more valuable to him than loyalty to someone who was already facing federal conspiracy charges, which meant that the evidentiary structure around Damien Cross was becoming something prosecutors called a gift. Victor Hale submitted his resignation from the board on Friday. Carol Wen submitted hers 2 hours later. Both cited personal reasons, which fooled no one and didn't need to. They were gone, and that was the functional point. Logan rebuilt the security team with the 8 he'd kept and 4 new hires he recruited through a network he hadn't activated in years, people he'd served with or trained alongside who'd transitioned to civilian work and were good at it. People whose baseline he understood in a way he couldn't understand strangers. He was not under any illusion that this made the team perfect. It made it better, which was the realistic target. He called Corinne Bass on Friday evening to thank her. "You did the heavy lifting," she said. "I just explained what didn't happen. You explained it to people who needed to hear it from someone with credentials."
"That's what credentials are for," she said. "How are you doing?" "Fine." "Logan. Tired," he said. Maisie made me a card. It has a drawing of me in what I think is supposed to be a boardroom, except it looks more like a submarine, and there's a figure that might be Damien Cross being hit by what I believe is a lightning bolt. Corinne did laugh at that, an actual laugh, clean and short. She's a good kid. Yeah, he said, she really is. When this settles down, you should take some time off. I know. I mean it, not eventually, soon. I will, he said, and meant it in the way that people mean things when they can't yet see the specific shape of when they'll be possible. After he hung up, he sat in his apartment for a while. The space felt the same as it always had. The dishes in the drying rack, Maisie's drawings on the refrigerator, his boots by the door, but he was aware of feeling something he hadn't felt in a while, a kind of stillness that wasn't the absence of problems, but was the presence of a moment where the immediate danger had actually passed. He was not good at those moments. He'd never been good at them. The training made you good at the escalation, in the middle of it, and the immediate aftermath, but the part where you actually sat down afterward and let your nervous system catch up, that part had always felt foreign to him, like a language he understood in theory but couldn't quite speak. Maisie came and sat next to him on the couch without being asked, the way she sometimes did, and leaned against his arm with a book she wasn't reading, and neither of them said anything for a while. Are you okay? She asked eventually. Yeah, he said. She turned a page she hadn't been reading. You have the face. Which face? The one where you're doing math in your head. He looked down at her. What kind of math? I don't know, she said. Math about whether things are going to be okay, I think. He put his arm around her. She let him, which at 8 she didn't always. Things are going to be okay, he said. I know, she said. I just wanted you to stop doing the math. She turned another page. Also, we're out of cereal. I'll get groceries tomorrow. Real groceries? Not just cereal and eggs? Real groceries. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her not reading, and Logan sat there with his daughter against his arm in the apartment that was too small and had a draft from the kitchen window in winter and a radiator that knocked at 3 a.m., and thought that in the specific calculus of what a life was worth, this was the number he kept coming back to. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Logan arrived at work to find a plain envelope on his desk with his name written on it in handwriting he didn't recognize. Inside was a single index card. On the index card, in small, neat print, the original plan was sedation in the appetizer course. The restaurant switch made it impossible. You already know the rest. Someone who chose the right side late. He read it twice, turned it over, blank on the back, set it down. It confirmed what he'd theorized the night he'd called Isabella from his kitchen. The choking had been the improvised fallback, activated when the original plan became impossible because the venue changed 4 days before the dinner. Damien Cross had not expected to need it. He'd needed it anyway, and it had failed anyway, for reasons that began with a man who called restaurant reservation lines 11 weeks in a row and ended up seated near the kitchen. Logan put the card in his pocket. He told Isabella about it that afternoon. She read it and was quiet for a moment. Do you know who sent it? No, I have a guess. Doesn't matter much. It matters for the prosecution. I've already passed it to Caruso, Logan said. He'll work it. My job is your security, not the DA's case. She looked at him with that expression she occasionally had, the one that was evaluating something it kept finding consistent. You're very clear about what your job is, she said. It helps, he said. When you know what you're actually responsible for. She set the card down on her desk. I want to do something about the medical situation more broadly, she said. Not just yours. I've been thinking about it since you mentioned Maisie eating cereal twice a week. She looked at the card. I have a foundation. It's been mostly cosmetic, the kind of corporate philanthropy that exists to make annual reports look warmer. I want to restructure it around emergency medical assistance for working families caught between insurance gaps. She paused. I'd like your input on what that actually looks like for people in that situation. Since you know, Logan looked at her. That's a big shift. I have a lot of capital I've been generating without a particularly thoughtful idea of what to do with it, she said. Damien taught me something, even if it wasn't what he intended. I was building a company and calling it a purpose. I'd like to try doing those as separate things. That's going to take a long time to figure out. I know. She looked at him directly. I have good people now. I can afford to think about things that take a long time. He nodded slowly. I'll put together some notes, he said. I know you will, she said, and the edge of her mouth moved.
The charges against Logan were formally dropped on a Monday, 6 weeks after the board meeting. Caruso called him at 7:40 a.m., earlier than Logan expected, which told him the detective had been waiting to make this call, and read off the case number and the dismissal language in the specific flat monotone of a man reading official text, then added at the end, "For what it's worth, I pulled your service record, the parts I could access." Logan was quiet. "I didn't say anything to anyone," Caruso said. "Wasn't relevant to the case." "Thank you," Logan said. "Don't thank me. I also read the assault complaint Damian Cross filed, which, given what I now know about who you are and what you've actually done in your life, struck me as—" He paused, choosing his word with the care of someone who didn't use many unnecessary ones. "Audacious." Logan made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Anyway," Caruso said, "you're clear. Tell your kid." He did. He picked Maisie up from school that afternoon, something he couldn't always do given hours, but today he'd made it work. And they walked home instead of taking the subway because the weather was reasonable for October, and she had things to tell him about her day that required more than a 12-minute commute to fully convey. She told him about a disagreement she'd had with her friend Destiny over whether it was possible to train a feral cat, which Maisie maintained it was, and Destiny maintained was wishful thinking. She told him that her math teacher had given back a test, and she'd gotten a 94, which she was happy with, but felt she could have done better on 2 specific questions if she'd read them more carefully. She told him that there was a field trip coming up to the Natural History Museum, and she'd already decided which dinosaur exhibit she was going to spend the most time in. Logan walked next to her and listened to all of it, and periodically the thought surfaced that exactly this ordinary Tuesday afternoon walk, Maisie navigating a sidewalk crack without looking down because she'd been using the same route home long enough to know the terrain, this was what had been at stake. Not in the abstract, not philosophically, concretely. If things had gone differently in a boardroom 3 weeks ago, or in a restaurant before that, this walk didn't happen. There was a version of events in which Maisie had been meeting him at a police station instead of a school door, and before that a version in which she hadn't had a father to meet at all. He didn't let himself live in those versions, but he let himself feel the weight of not being in them. "Dad," Maisie said. "Yeah." "You're doing the math again." "I'm not." "You have the face." "I'm just walking." She looked up at him with her skeptic's eyes. "You're never just walking," she said. "Your brain doesn't work like that." "Maybe I'm getting better at it." She considered this with genuine seriousness. "Maybe," she allowed. Then, "Can we get pizza?" "Yeah," he said. "We can get pizza." She went back to the feral cat argument, refining her position for when she next encountered Destiny, and Logan walked beside her in the thin October light, and the math he was doing, she wasn't wrong, he was always doing some kind of math, came out the same way it had been coming out all week. Worth it, the numbers said. Every single calculation, when you ran it honestly, came out the same. Worth it. Isabella called him that evening after 8, after Maisie was in bed. He was in the kitchen with a cup of coffee that had gone cold the same way his coffee always did when he got distracted by something. "The charges were dropped today," she said. "Caruso's office confirmed it. He called me this morning." "I know, he called me too." A pause. "I wanted to make sure you heard it from me as well." "I appreciate that." A quiet moment on the line. Outside his kitchen window, the city was doing its ordinary nighttime things. A siren somewhere, the bass from someone's music a few floors up, the particular ambient hum that never fully went away. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah." "The night at Calloway's. When you came back to your table." She paused. "You just sat down, you cut your steak, you just continued having dinner." "Yeah." "How?" she said. "After doing what you did, After that whole room and the silence and my security people staring at you, how did you just sit back down and continue?" Logan looked at the cold coffee in front of him. "My daughter was there," he said. "It was her birthday. The souffle hadn't come yet." A moment. "That's it?" Isabella said. "That's it," he said. "Some things are complicated, some things aren't." She was quiet for a while. When she spoke again, her voice had something in it that was unguarded in the way she sometimes was on calls late in the evening, when the professional architecture had gone off duty. "I've been thinking about what kind of person just does that," she said. "Not the rescue, the sitting back down, the continuity. Like the most important thing in the room was still his daughter." Logan didn't say anything. "I didn't have that growing up," she said. "Someone who did that. Someone for whom I was the most important thing in the room regardless of what else was happening." He was quiet because this was the kind of thing that didn't need a response. It needed to be said and then given space, and he'd learned the difference a long time ago. "Maisie's lucky," she said. "I'm the lucky one," he said, and meant it in the simple, non-performative way he meant most things. It was just true, and true things didn't need decoration. Another quiet. Then Isabella said, "Good night, Logan." "Good night," he said. He sat in the kitchen for a while after she hung up. The coffee was cold. The radiator knocked twice from the direction of the hallway and then went quiet. Upstairs, someone walked across their floor in shoes they should have taken off at the door. He thought about the note on the index card. The original plan was sedation. The restaurant switch made it impossible. He thought about the specific, unremarkable phone call he'd made 11 weeks in a row at 8:01 in the morning, pressing redial with the patience of a man who knew that persistence was often the only strategy available when you didn't have any other kind of leverage. He thought about Maisie's drawing on the refrigerator. The shark or the submarine? Brigadier in big, uneven letters. He got up, poured the cold coffee down the drain, rinsed the mug, and put it in the drying rack next to a bowl and a glass and a small plate with a cartoon sun on it that was Maisie's and had been Maisie's since she was 4, and still the plate she chose every morning without variation. He turned off the kitchen light, checked the locks, front door, window latch, the one on the fire escape that stuck sometimes in cold weather. All of them solid. All of them where they were supposed to be. He went to bed. November came in cold and fast that year, the kind of cold that arrived before anyone was ready for it, stripping the last of the leaves off the trees on Logan's block in a single windy weekend and leaving the sidewalks wet and dark by Monday morning. He noticed it the way he noticed most things, practically, without sentiment. He dug Maisie's winter coat out of the hallway closet on Sunday afternoon, discovered it was too small across the shoulders, and spent an hour that evening on his phone finding a replacement in her size that could arrive by Wednesday. He bought himself nothing. His old jacket was fine. It had been fine for 3 winters and would be fine for a 4th. Some things about him didn't change, and probably wouldn't, but some things had. The new apartment came up in the second week of November, 3 months after the board meeting. Isabella raised it carefully, the way she'd learned to raise things with Logan, directly, without preamble, but with enough space afterward that he could think without feeling cornered. They were in her office, end of a Wednesday, going through the week's security assessment. She waited until the professional items were done, until he'd closed his notebook and was getting ready to stand. "The housing program," she said. He settled back. "Sterling's executive protection housing benefit. It covers senior security personnel who are on call outside business hours, which you are. The benefit provides access to company-leased residential units." She held his gaze. "There's a 3-bedroom in Brooklyn Heights. It's been sitting empty for 4 months because the previous head of security lived in New Jersey and declined it." Logan said nothing. "Before you argue," she said, "I want to be specific about what this is and what it isn't. It is a compensation benefit you are contractually entitled to as part of your role. It is not charity. It is not a gift. The lease is held in Sterling's name and comes out of the operational budget under the same line item as the security vehicles and the communication equipment." She paused. "It has a yard." He looked at her. "A yard. Small. It's Brooklyn, but it has a yard." Another pause. "Maisie mentioned to me last month that she wanted a yard." Logan was quiet for a moment. When did Maisie mention that to you? The question wasn't accusatory. It was the kind of question that opened a larger one underneath it, and they both understood that. The Tuesday you had the budget meeting that ran long, Isabella said. She came to the office after school and waited for you. We talked for about 40 minutes. He hadn't known the full extent of that conversation. Maisie had mentioned she'd talked to Isabella, described her as pretty serious but actually kind of funny if you get her going, which was an accurate character assessment. He hadn't known the content went as far as yards. What else did she mention, he said? That you make good eggs but bad pasta, that she's read every book in her classroom's library and needs new ones, that Brigadier the feral cat finally let her touch him once, briefly, and then immediately acted like it hadn't happened. Isabella's expression was doing the thing it occasionally did now. Not quite a smile, but the territory adjacent to one. She also mentioned that your apartment smells like motor oil even when you haven't been to the garage, and that she's decided that's just your natural smell at this point. Logan looked at the ceiling briefly. She talks a lot. She's articulate, Isabella said. It's different. He was quiet for a moment. Brooklyn Heights. 20 minutes to the office. Good school district. The yard faces south, so it gets afternoon light. She stopped herself. I'm overselling it. It's a yard. It's not large, but it's there, and it's real, and it would be Maisie's. Logan thought about the apartment on his current block, the kitchen window draft, the 3 a.m. radiator, the hallway that was always slightly too dark because the building management kept replacing the bulbs with lower wattage to save money. He'd been there 6 years. He knew every specific complaint it had, the way you know the complaints of something you've lived with long enough that they've stopped being problems and started being just the texture of the place. But Maisie had never had a yard. All right, he said. Isabella blinked, and he recognized that she'd again prepared for resistance she wasn't going to need. It was becoming a pattern between them. Her braced for the argument, him arriving at yes through a route she hadn't expected. All right, she said. But I want to see it first, he said. Maisie and I, together, before I sign anything. She needs to decide. Of course. And if she doesn't like it, then we find a different one, Isabella said simply. The benefit doesn't expire. They went that Saturday. All 3 of them, which was not how Logan had planned it. He'd envisioned a practical walkthrough, him and Maisie, evaluating the space. Instead, Isabella had offered to drive since she knew the building manager. And somehow the practical walkthrough became the 3 of them standing in a kitchen with afternoon light coming through the south-facing window, while Maisie walked through each room with the focused deliberation of a building inspector. She was in the backyard for 8 minutes before she came back inside. Logan and Isabella were standing in the kitchen, not quite talking, comfortable in the silence in the way that had developed between them over 3 months of working closely and honestly in difficult circumstances. The particular ease of people who have seen each other under pressure and know what they found there. Maisie came through the back door with her coat muddy at the hem and said, "There's a good spot for a garden." "What kind of garden?" Logan asked. "Vegetables, I think. Maybe tomatoes. Miss Reyes has tomatoes." "You don't know how to grow tomatoes." "I can learn," she said with complete confidence. She looked at Isabella. "Has anyone lived here before?" "Not for several months," Isabella said. Maisie nodded. "It smells okay. Some places smell like other people for a long time." She looked at the kitchen cabinets. "Can we paint these? They're kind of depressing." "Yes," Isabella said. "Blue?" "Whatever color you want." Maisie considered the cabinets with the seriousness this apparently deserved. Then she turned to her father. "I think we should take it," she said. "The yard is good and the school is better than my current school. I looked it up." Logan looked at his daughter. 8 years old, standing in a kitchen in Brooklyn with mud on her coat, having already researched the school district. He didn't know who she got that from either. "Yeah," he said. "All right." They moved in the first week of December. The move itself was not smooth, because moves never were. The couch from the old apartment didn't fit through the stairwell at the new one and had to be disassembled and reassembled. A process that took 2 hours and produced language Logan kept firmly internal while Maisie was in earshot. 3 boxes got left in the old apartment by accident and had to be retrieved 2 days later. The kitchen faucet in the new place had a slow drip that the building manager sent someone to fix who did not fully fix it.
and Logan fixed it himself on a Saturday morning with the particular grim efficiency of a man who has been fixing things himself his entire adult life. But the yard was there, and the afternoon light was real. And on the third evening in the new apartment, Maisie sat at the kitchen table with a library book about container gardening that she had checked out on her new library card from the new neighborhood branch, planning a spring tomato garden with the kind of methodical enthusiasm she brought to things that genuinely interested her. Logan watched her from the doorway for a moment. Then he went to make dinner. Actual dinner. Pasta, with a sauce from scratch. Because she'd been right about the pasta, and he'd been working on it. He burned it slightly. She ate it anyway and said it was better than last time, which was a specific kind of compliment he'd learned to recognize as genuine coming from her.
Damian Cross entered a not guilty plea in late November, which surprised no one. His legal team was expensive and skilled and began immediately constructing the argument that the communications had been misinterpreted, that the financial transfers were legitimate consultancy payments, that the security personnel assignment was standard operational procedure, that the entire case was a persecution narrative constructed by a CEO trying to eliminate a legitimate internal challenger. It was, Logan had to admit, a reasonable enough framework for a certain kind of jury in a certain kind of case. But Teller had cooperated, and the forensic accounting was solid, and there was the index card, which Caruso's office had traced. Logan never found out definitively how, but Caruso had the expression of a man who'd had a productive conversation with someone deciding between two bad options, to a junior associate in Damian's legal preparation team who had, in Caruso's words, a conscience that kicked in about 3 weeks late but still managed to make the flight. The trial was set for spring. Logan would be called as a witness. He'd been through that process before, in different contexts, and he knew what it required: precision, patience, and the particular discipline of answering only what was asked without editorializing, which he was better at than most people assumed. He didn't think about it more than necessary. The legal machinery was in motion and would continue whether or not he spent his evenings worrying about it, and worrying about things that were already in motion was a waste of resource he'd never been able to afford. What he thought about instead, in the evenings after Maisie went to bed, was the foundation. 2. Isabella had started restructuring the Sterling Foundation in October, quietly and seriously. She'd brought in a consultant who specialized in healthcare access policy, a woman named Dr. Vivian Marsh, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and spoke in paragraphs so precise they sounded edited. Logan had sat in on 2 meetings at Isabella's request, as a resource, she'd said, for what the actual experience of navigating emergency medical costs looked like from the inside. He'd found those meetings harder than the boardroom. The boardroom had been tactical. These required something different. The specific vulnerability of saying out loud, to strangers, what it had actually felt like to be handed an insurance denial letter 3 weeks after his 8-year-old had emergency surgery. What it had felt like to set up a payment plan for something that had been outside his control, and then to build a budget around that payment plan that left no room for error, and then to live for 14 months inside that budget knowing that one car repair or one school expense could tip the whole structure. He said it plainly, the way he said most things. He didn't perform the difficulty of it. He just described it accurately, and the 2 women in the room listened with the particular attention of people who were genuinely trying to understand something rather than confirm what they already thought. After the second meeting, Isabella walked him to the elevator. "Thank you," she said, "for being willing to say that." "It's just facts," he said. "Facts about things that are hard to say," she said. "That's different from just facts." He looked at her. She was right, and he knew she was right, and he didn't have a deflection prepared for that particular accuracy, so he just nodded. "Vivian thinks we can have the first grant cycle operational by April," Isabella said. "Families between insurance coverage gaps, emergency medical events, simple application process. She's very specific about the application not requiring more documentation than the insurance companies already demanded, which she says adds insult to injury." "She's right about that," Logan said. "I know." Isabella looked at the elevator door. "I want to name the first grant program. I've been thinking about what to call it." She glanced at him sideways. "I was thinking about naming it after a person, someone who demonstrated what it looks like to keep showing up for someone who depends on you, regardless of the cost. She paused, but I thought that person might object. Logan looked at her. He would, he said. I thought so. The elevator arrived. I'll think of something else. He stepped in, turned around. She was looking at him with the expression that had been slowly, over 3 months, becoming the most natural one on her face, open in a way her professional face wasn't, specific to him in a way he'd noticed and filed and hadn't done anything about. Because the timing had never been right, and he was, fundamentally, a man who believed in right timing. "Good night, Logan," she said. "Good night," he said. The elevator doors closed. The first barbecue happened the second Saturday in December, 3 weeks after the move to Brooklyn, and it was Isabella's suggestion and Maisie's execution and Logan's grill, a second-hand propane thing he'd bought from a neighbor at the old building and transported in the back of a borrowed truck. It was too cold for a barbecue. This was the consensus of everyone present except Maisie, who had decided they were having one and had communicated this decision to Isabella by text. Logan found out later that they had exchanged numbers at some point in October, information he absorbed without comment, and had invited Corinne Bass, who arrived in a down vest and brought a potato salad that was significantly better than anything else at the table, and Priya Agarwal, who stood near the warmth of the grill drinking mulled cider and discussing something technical with Logan that Maisie periodically interrupted to offer her opinions on whether the burgers were ready yet. They were not ready yet. Isabella arrived 20 minutes after everyone else, slightly out of breath, carrying 2 bottles of sparkling water and a pan of brownies that she admitted immediately had been purchased rather than made. She stood in the yard in a coat that was too nice for a backyard in December and looked around at the people assembled. Corinne arguing cheerfully with Maisie about the correct internal temperature of a burger, Priya looking up information on her phone to settle the argument, Logan turning things on the grill with the focused calm of a man who had found, in this one domestic activity, something approaching peace, and her expression did something that she probably didn't know was visible. Logan saw it. He saw it the way he saw most things, without making a production of it, without saying anything, just registering it and understanding what it was. It was the expression of someone who had spent a long time in rooms that were professionally full of people and personally empty, and who was standing in a cold backyard in December looking at something that was neither. He didn't say anything about it. He handed her a pair of tongs and said, "You can flip the second set. Don't press down on them." "Why not?" "Because it pushes the juice out." "I didn't know that," she said. "Most people don't," Maisie said, materializing at Isabella's elbow with the sudden displacement typical of her when she had something to contribute. "Dad's been teaching me. He says cooking is just chemistry if you pay attention." "He's right," Corinne said from somewhere behind them. "I know," Maisie said, with the tone of someone who considered her father's correctness on most practical subjects a settled matter, and then immediately asked if the brownies were the ones with walnuts because she didn't like walnuts, and Isabella said they were not. She'd specifically gotten them without, and Maisie said good with her serious face. And something in that small specific exchange, Isabella having noticed, having remembered, having done something about it, sat quietly in Logan's chest for the rest of the afternoon. It was cold enough by 4:30 that they moved inside, and the kitchen was too small for 5 people and a potato salad and a pan of brownies, but it was also warm and loud in the specific way of small kitchens with too many people in them. And Maisie sat on the counter because there weren't enough chairs and narrated an elaborate plan for the spring garden, soliciting opinions from everyone, incorporating Corinne's suggestion about basil and firmly rejecting Priya's suggestion about kale. Logan leaned against the counter beside his daughter and drank a cup of coffee that was actually hot this time because he'd been paying attention, and listened to the room and thought about what it had taken to get here. It hadn't been clean. That was the truth. No one's version of this story would be able to make clean, no matter how they told it. He'd spent 11 weeks calling a reservation line and ended up in a restaurant where someone he'd never met had been set up to die. He'd acted on instinct developed from years of trauma and training and seen the people around her do nothing. He'd taken a job under pressure to protect someone from a man he hadn't yet met, and in doing so had exposed his daughter to a level of risk he'd spent years trying to keep her insulated from. The debt was gone now, but it had been real. The criminal complaint had been dropped, but it had existed.
The 2 weeks of uncertainty about whether a criminal charge was going to follow him had been real, and what that would have meant for Maisie had been real. And he didn't have the luxury of making those realities smaller in retrospect just because the outcome had been good. That was the thing nobody talked about in the versions of stories like this that got cleaned up into lessons. The cost was real even when the outcome was good. The fear was real. The vulnerability was real. He had stood in that boardroom and talked about Kandahar in clinical language because it was the right tactical move, and afterward he had sat in his car in the parking structure for 12 minutes before he was ready to drive, because certain things don't stop costing just because you've decided to spend them. But here was the other truth, the one that sat on the other side of all of that. He had moved across a restaurant because someone needed it, and he was the only person who was going to. Not because he was exceptional, because he was paying attention and everyone else wasn't. He had taken a job he hadn't planned on and done it with the same discipline he'd brought to everything that actually mattered in his life. And somewhere in the doing of it, in the 4 a.m. personnel files and the renovation room meetings and the steady insistence on getting the thing right, something had been built that he hadn't planned for and couldn't have engineered and wouldn't trade. You didn't always get to see what your choices built. In his experience, mostly you didn't. Mostly you made the best call available and lived in the uncertainty of not knowing whether it was enough. He'd done that in Kandahar, and he'd done it in the years after, and he'd done it every day since Maisie was born, because parenting was its own particular theater of decisions made under uncertainty about outcomes you couldn't control. But occasionally, not often, not in any way you could count on, you got to stand in a warm kitchen on a cold December afternoon and see exactly what the choices built. He was standing in one now. So, Maisie's school had a winter concert in the second week of December. She had a part in it. Not a solo, she'd informed him with 12-year-old level disdain for what she considered a primary school activity, even though she was 8, but a speaking part, 2 lines in a short theatrical piece the 3rd grade had written collectively about seasons. Her lines were, "The cold doesn't last. It just feels that way while it's happening." She had written them herself, which her teacher had confirmed with the specific pride of someone who knows when a child has produced something more than the assignment required. Logan sat in the 3rd row. Isabella sat beside him, which hadn't been planned. She'd asked, cautiously, if it would be appropriate, and he'd said yes, because it would. And because Maisie had extended the invitation herself with the directness that characterized all of her invitations. A text to Isabella that said, "Concert Thursday. You should come. Dad will be there, but he gets weird at concerts." He didn't know how to feel about his 8-year-old characterizing him in text messages to his employer. He'd decided the most appropriate response was to say nothing and move forward, which was, he acknowledged, exactly the kind of behavior Maisie was probably referring to. The concert was in the school gymnasium, on a portable stage, with the lighting that school gymnasiums always had. Institutional fluorescent softened slightly by 2 colored gels someone had taped over the stage lights, and the acoustic situation that school gymnasiums always had, which was to say the echo made everything slightly harder to hear than it should be. Maisie was the 8th child to speak. She walked to the microphone with the particular careful dignity of a child who has been told to walk slowly and is taking the instructions seriously. And she looked out at the audience with the expression she wore when she was doing something important and didn't want anyone to know she was nervous about it. And she said her 2 lines in a clear, even voice that carried across the gymnasium without difficulty. "The cold doesn't last. It just feels that way while it's happening." Beside Logan, Isabella was very still. He glanced at her. Her eyes were on Maisie, and her face was doing what faces did when something landed in the exact spot something needed to land. Not dramatic, not performed, just the quiet, unmistakable evidence of a person being genuinely reached by something. He looked back at Maisie, who had stepped back from the microphone with a nod so small it was almost imperceptible, which was her version of satisfaction, and taken her place back in the line of 3rd graders. After the concert, they waited in the hallway while the kids changed out of their performance clothes. Isabella stood beside Logan with her coat over her arm, and the hallway was full of parents and younger siblings, and the specific organized noise of a school evening event. And she said, quietly, "She wrote that herself?" "Yeah." A pause. "She's going to be something."
She already is something, Logan said. Isabella looked at him, that expression again, the open one, the one that was specifically for him. Yes, she said. She is. They were quiet for a moment in the noisy hallway, close enough that he could have said something, and the moment had enough weight that it would have held the words. He could feel her awareness of the same proximity, the same weight. He didn't say anything, not because he didn't have something to say, but because he understood, had always understood, with the particular patience of a man who had learned to trust timing, that some things didn't need to be said in school hallways at concert nights. Some things could wait for a better moment without losing anything essential about what they were. She seemed to understand that too, or maybe she was just giving him the space he always seemed to need. Either way, she didn't say anything either, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable. Maisie appeared through the gymnasium door in her regular clothes, backpack on, already telling them about what had gone wrong with the third kid's microphone and how she'd thought the whole thing was going to fall apart, but it hadn't. Your lines were good, Logan told her. I know, she said. I wrote them. Where'd you get it from? Isabella asked. That idea, the cold not lasting. Maisie considered this question with the gravity it deserved. I was thinking about the thing Dad does, she said. When things are hard, he doesn't act like they're going to last forever. He just deals with what's in front of him. She looked at her father. I thought that was true about most things. Not just cold. Logan looked at his daughter, 8 years old, combat medics patience, mechanics practicality, the particular clear-sightedness of a child who had been watching her father figure out how to keep going and had been, apparently, taking notes. Yeah, he said. That's about right. He got a letter from the VA in January. Routine correspondence, an update on the appeals process for a benefit he'd been waiting on for 4 years. The kind of government communication that arrived in a plain envelope and required reading twice to understand. He read it at the kitchen table in the morning before Maisie was up, with the coffee that was actually hot now because he'd gotten into the habit of timing it better. In the kitchen, with the blue cabinets, the color Maisie had chosen, a specific blue she'd described as serious but not sad, which he thought was the most accurate description of a color he'd ever heard. And by the time he finished reading the letter, the morning light had changed, and somewhere outside a bird was doing something optimistic in the bare winter tree near the yard wall. The appeal had been approved. It wasn't a large sum, not life-changing in the dramatic sense, but it was acknowledgement, which was the part he'd been waiting on longer than the money. The official, documented recognition that something had happened and that the cost of it had been real and that it was owed to him. He'd stopped expecting it 3 years ago. He'd kept filing because the alternative was letting them be right by default. And being right by default was the thing he'd never been able to make his peace with. He set the letter down and drank his coffee and thought about what his life looked like right now versus what it had looked like 14 months ago, when he'd been making 11 phone calls to a restaurant reservation line and eating cereal twice a week to make the math work. The math still required attention. It always would. He wasn't the kind of person who stopped doing the math just because the immediate crisis had passed. That wasn't a character trait. It was structural. It was how he was built. But the math had different inputs now, and the margins were different, and there was a yard outside the blue cabinet kitchen where a 9-year-old was going to plant tomatoes in the spring with the methodical confidence of someone who had already decided they would work. He thought about what Maisie had said about the cold. He thought about what he'd said to Isabella in the elevator weeks ago, about some things being simple, about the most important thing in the room. He thought about a restaurant on East 54th Street and the table near the kitchen, and a woman in a charcoal blazer with dark eyes that had been searching the room for something they weren't finding, and a moment that had lasted 8 seconds and changed the year that followed in ways he still, some mornings, couldn't fully account for. He didn't believe things happened for a reason in the cosmic sense. He'd seen too much to believe in that architecture, too many things that happened to people who deserved better than what happened, too much random violence in the shape of circumstance that no framework of meaning could honestly contain. He'd stopped looking for that kind of meaning a long time ago, somewhere between a field in Kandahar and a VA waiting room, and the night he sat in a hospital with his 4-year-old in a bed behind a curtain and calculated what he could not afford. But he did believe in what people chose when things got hard. He believed that what you did in the specific moment when it was easier not to act said something real about who you were, not who you meant to be, not who you planned to be under better circumstances, but actually were, in the body, in the instant of it. He believed that most people had more of that capacity than they thought, and that the difference between people who acted and people who didn't was usually not character, but attention. Being awake to the room. Seeing what was actually in front of you instead of what you expected to find. He'd been awake in a restaurant on a Thursday night because his daughter was across the table, and she was the reason he was always awake. The specific gravity that had kept him oriented when other things had tried to pull him off course. She hadn't known she was doing it. She was just being ate, but the effect was real. You couldn't plan for that kind of thing. You couldn't engineer it or arrange it or call it in on a reservation line. You could only stay awake and let the moment be what it was and do the thing that was right to do when it arrived. He heard Maisie's alarm go off down the hall, a sound like a small digital bird, something she'd chosen herself, and would probably change next month because she changed it every month. And then the particular silence of the snooze attempt, and then her feet on the floor. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in pajamas and her winter socks, hair at an angle, carrying her container gardening book with one finger marking her place, because she'd apparently been reading it before her alarm. "You're up early," she said. "Got a letter." She looked at the envelope on the table. "Good letter or annoying letter?" "Good one." She nodded, satisfied, and climbed into her chair and opened her book to her marked page. "I figured out where I want the tomatoes," she said. "The south corner. It gets the most light." "I know," he said. "You're right." She looked up at him, studied his face for a second with those careful eyes. "Are you doing the math?" "Not today," he said. She looked at him for another second, checking the accuracy of this claim. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied, and looked back at her book. "Can we have eggs?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "We can have eggs." He got up and got the pan and the butter and the eggs from the refrigerator, and the morning came in through the south window the way mornings did in this kitchen, clean and ordinary and full of the small domestic sounds of a life that was not perfect and had never been designed to be, only to be real. He cracked the first egg. Outside, the winter bird was still at it in the bare tree, patient, certain of something he couldn't hear yet. Spring was coming, it always did.